Hello and welcome. Today I'll be showing you how to repair the iPod Nano 1st Gen. This one just needs a battery replacement, although I'll show you how to fully disassemble it as well, just in case you need to change the screen or buttons on yours. Although the battery is soldered in on this model, it's by far the easiest out of the whole Nano lineup to repair. Externally, its design is similar to the iPod Classic 5th Gen, but smaller, and it comes apart in a similar fashion as you'll see in a second. As its housing is made up of two separate pieces, it doesn't suffer from the same black spot issues when the battery starts to expand like some of the other Nanos do. Although speaking of battery issues, there was actually a recall on this model announced in November 2011. Apparently in some very rare cases, the batteries were overheating, causing a potential fire risk. Apple was offering a free exchange for an iPod Nano 6th or 7th Gen. That program's ended now, but it's a good idea to replace the battery on one of these if you still have one. It wasn't on all models either, just ones with batteries from a specific manufacturer. Although I will say, from my personal experience, the batteries on this model seem to hold up much better than the rest of the Nanos, despite the fact that they're older. To open it up, first grab an iPod opening tool, or I usually prefer to use a dull box cutter blade since the edge is sharper and it's easier to get in between the gap. Then pry it open like this, starting on either side at the bottom and then working our way up to the top. After it's off, you can remove the rear housing like so. After removing it, you'll probably notice a couple of clips to hold the back cover on are sticking up. You can push these down using a pair of tweezers or pliers. And as you can see, we now have access to everything. If you just wanted to replace your battery, you can skip to this point in the video now. If you wanted to replace the screen or buttons on this model, we would first need to remove the logic board. In order to do that, we first need to remove these 4 screws. It's a good idea to use a magnetic parts mat or tray so we can keep track of which holes the screws went in, as I'm pretty sure some of these are different sizes. One of the screws near the headphone jack's hidden under some copper tape. Peel it up and then you'll have access to it. Make sure you don't miss that one, as if you try to pry up the logic board before it's removed, you could end up damaging something. We also need to dislodge the battery, which is just held in with some adhesive. You can pry it up using a metal pry tool like this, being careful not to puncture it, although the adhesive isn't very strong thankfully. Now we have to carefully unclip the flex cables for both the buttons and the screen using some tweezers, or even better, a plastic tool. To do that, first bring the bottom of the logic board forward like this and release the clip holding in the button's flex cable. It should then release and easily pull out. Now we have to do the same thing for the screen. Just unlatch it like this. It might be a bit tricky since there isn't much space to work with. Then once it's removed, you can remove the logic board, giving us access to everything underneath. If you needed to replace your screen, you would simply just remove it from the housing. I won't do it here as they're adhered on pretty hard on this model and I don't want to risk damaging it, although if it's already broken, that's not much of a concern. It is possible to remove it without breaking it though, if you wanted to salvage a good one out of a broken iPod. And if you needed to replace the buttons as well, you would just remove the metal plate holding them on too. Then it all just comes apart. It's just held on with adhesive. If some of your buttons aren't clicking, you can use the steps shown in my iPod Nano 2nd Gen guide to clean under the domes like this. Now just putting it back together the same way it came apart. It's kind of difficult getting those flex cables reinstalled as there isn't much space to work with. I'd recommend using the flat-ended pair of tweezers like these. Then screwing the screws back in, making sure to put them in the right holes. Now to replace the battery. If you hadn't already pried it up like we did earlier, I'd do that first. At this stage, I'd take note of which pads the wires are running to so you don't accidentally run the wires to the wrong pads. It goes white on the left, red in the middle, and black on the right. Before we desolder the wires, I always like to apply a bit of flux paste to the solder joints. It'll just make the solder flow more easily. Then holding the soldering iron on each joint and removing the wires one by one. I also added a bit of extra solder to the tip there as well. Make sure you're not pulling too hard on the wire when you're removing it, as you can actually rip the pad off the logic board and then you won't be able to solder the new wires in. Before we put in the new battery, it's also a good idea to add some new solder to all the joints, as the stuff that's already on there might be a bit oxidized and won't flow very well. Now soldering in each wire one by one. There's actually a little hole in the middle of each pad that we can slot the wire through, as I'm doing here in the video. Although if you're finding it a bit tricky, you could also just wire them in sideways on top of the pad. After it's soldered in, now we need to find a place to tuck all the excess wires. I like to tuck them under the BMS in the slot where the battery goes. The BMS is usually not as thick as the rest of the battery, and there should be just enough room. We can also put another strip of Captain tape over the wires to hold them down like what was on there to begin with. Now just to reattach the back cover. Make sure that the lock switch on the back cover is in the same position as the switch on the circuit board, as if they're misaligned you could end up snapping the little black nub off of the logic board, and then you'll lose your lock switch functionality. And now we're done. Just give it a little test to make sure you're happy with everything. I'd also recommend giving it a wipe down with isopropyl alcohol to get it fully clean as well. If you need help fixing your iPod, you can book a mail-in repair on my website. Links in the description. I fix pretty much every model at this stage. I also sell used iPods and replacement parts, such as the batteries for this model and for many others there too. Or if you'd like to add Bluetooth to your iPod Classic, I'm still selling the Bluetooth upgrade kits there as well. If you enjoyed this video, hit the like and subscribe. Hope to see you next time. Bye.